I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
Hi, people. Trish Wood here. And the sound of my voice is playing tricks on you because I'm actually recording this way sooner than the day you're hearing it, which is unusual. We usually drop the show on the same day we record it, which is Friday, because I like to stay current with my little blurb talking at the beginning. And I won't be able to do that for a couple of weeks because I'm going away, and I recorded these early so that I could leave y'all with 2 full shows and I could stop thinking about bottom surgeries and Ukraine war crimes and all of the other terrible things that are crossing our transom and Lahaina, and it's just been a terrible 2 weeks. Not to mention, they're talking about bringing masks back. They're trying to get the old band back together again for a replay. And you know what? Here's the deal, folks. We're not doing that again. We are not locking down again. We're not wearing masks again. We're not doing it again. And I'll tell you why I can say that with such absolute certainty. Number one, we know that the data does not and never did support those moves. They were absolutely experimental. And in fact, well-designed studies have shown that those things don't work at all. So we're not going to do it. We know it's harmful. We know it's dangerous even. And aside from our own individual health and feelings about it, it's bad for our culture. It's bad for our society. It's bad for our children. We're just not doing that again, are we? So if we collectively say we're not doing it, then we won't do it. And they can't put us all in jail, can they? They can't send us all to a COVID concentration camp. So get ready. I think they're trying to float it. I'm seeing it more and more in Twitter. Andre Picard, the health columnist for the Globe, is kind of pushing it a bit. There's studies, hugely questionable studies. There was a new one that came out the other day that was being pushed in the media about how a COVID infection does not confer natural immunity that prevents a second infection. And then if you actually read the details in the study, the people they studied were all senior citizens. So totally not a group that represents, 85% of the population. But this is what they do. And the media picks it up, and there's more. And long COVID has now, you might not die of COVID, but you might get long COVID. All this stuff is reappearing again. So it tells me that maybe our prime minister wants to use up the warehouses full of vaccines that he foolishly spent our tax dollars on that are probably actually expired by now. I don't know how that works, but they can be kind of fragile, right? So don't let them do that. That's not happening. Anyway, so I'm dropping 2 shows, and I will be back, not this show, not the following week's show, but the following week with a show that's a little bit more up to date. I've got a bunch of stuff on the go too, because Tamara Leach is going to trial in September in Ottawa. Do you believe it? It's upon us. And she and Chris Barber and I think others are going to go and face the music, which is so strange. This is so clearly a political prosecution, especially based on what happened at the public order emergencies inquiry should have exonerated them. But we don't live in that world anymore, people. We really don't. It is lawfare, no question about it. The same thing they're doing to Trump and others. They're getting away with it. And it's because individual people are so affected by the rhetoric around politics now that it's not just that, hey, there's someone whose politics you don't agree with, or hey, they have a different view of vaccines and lockdowns. They are evil. That is the rhetoric that came from our very own prime minister. They are evil people. And that's how we must view them. And you could really see that in Ottawa, that was top of mind with much of the citizenry there who were complaining about things as if it was some kind of a nuclear bomb being dropped on them when in fact it was honking noises. I mean, just ridiculous. So our courts and the people who operate within our courts, crowns, defense attorneys, judges, etc., they are not immune from what's happening in our culture. And another reason I know that is because my bread and butter as a journalist for a while was doing wrongful conviction stories. As you know, I brag about it a little bit that we did get Clayton Johnson out of prison for a murder he didn't commit. And he'd been duly convicted by the courts and the police, and the media were all in, and it turned out he didn't do it, and we proved it. So that happens more frequently than you would like. And those things happen because what happens in court is not immune from human foibles and frailties, and also people's sensitivity to propaganda. And this I lay directly at the feet of our prime minister. It's why I think he shouldn't govern anymore. There was a huge betrayal of trust here. And this is not insurrectionist, so don't try that out. Anybody who says the government should resign now, is an insurrectionist, right? Or an election denier or something. I'm none of those things. I'm observant. That is what I am. And what he did to the convoy by smearing them before they got there with no information. I know I say this a lot, but we have to keep saying it. It's true. Where's the evidence for what he was suggesting about them? There is none. There's no evidence for that. So he must be called to account on that point. The commission of inquiry into those events found that the things that he was saying were not true. So why did he say them? Did he make them up? Did he lie on purpose? I don't know, but we need to get to the bottom of that. He can't just walk away. And if we had a working news media, they'd be hammering him with questions about that, but we don't. And you know that. So anyway, Tamara and Chris are going, and I know that Mr. Yonkers of Yonkers Trucking down around St. Catharines, I don't know if he's on trial then, but he was arrested lately. So keep your eye on the ball here, people. We can't let what they did drift away into the sands of time. We must pay attention to what's happening. And I'm very likely going to be down there covering it for this show as well. So I'm hoping to set that up somehow. That's what's happening. I'm going away for 2 weeks and then back to launch on to the Tamara Leach and Chris Barber prosecution to see what happens there. And of course, we'll be doing regular programming too. But I know y'all are interested in that because you love them. And we followed them very closely on this show almost from the minute they left out west. Remember that? Coffee with the Convoy? Really fun and so hopeful too. So we got to keep that energy going, people. Okay. Our guest today is a very, very interesting guy. He's one of those people who he's so smart and what he says is so well thought through. And to me, quite important that I almost don't want to interrupt him with a question. I like to just kind of sit back and listen to these things that he says. His name is Simon Elmer, and he is one of the heads of an organization called Architects for Social Housing, which has not much to do with what we're talking about today. What he does is he writes and speaks absolutely brilliantly about how we've been taken over by the biosecurity state, which is so true. I'm just going to read a little bit about his book, which is called The Road to Fascism for a Critique of the Global Biosecurity State. With the lifting of the thousands of regulations which our lives were ruled by for 2 long years, there's been an understandable desire to believe that the coronavirus crisis, in quotations, is over and we will return to something like an albeit new normal. But as new crises have sprung up to take its place, a war in Ukraine, the so-called cost of living crisis, and the return of the environmental crisis, it's increasingly difficult not to look back on lockdown as the first campaign in a war that has not been declared by a government, but that is no less real for that. Don't you feel that way, that something has happened? I know we all do. So he writes about that. And he also says, the willingness of our government to use the forces of the state against their own populations on the justification of protecting us from ourselves signals a new level of authoritarianism and something like the return of fascism to the governmental, judicial, and cultural forms of the former neoliberal democracies of the West. And one of the aims of this book is to examine and validate this thesis. Its purpose in doing so, however, is not to contribute to an academic debate about the meaning of the term fascism, but rather to interrogate how and why the general and widespread moral collapse in the West over the past 2.5 years has been effected with such rapidity and ease, and to examine to what ends that collapse is being used. So that's what we're going to talk about today. He's very, very clever. Let me do my pitch, which is that we are happily ensconced on Substack right now where I write. I post the show there so you can find it through a link and then come back and engage in the comments section, which are getting really good. And last week's show, I expect there will be a lot of comments about it because we, through the eyes of Helen Joyce, who's terribly clever, unpacked some of the debauchery around the autogynephilic trans people and how this sexual fetish has become a very aggressive and yet protected class as if it's a human rights issue. I mean, it's ridiculous. So that's obviously we're talking about. If you want to go back and talk about that more, that is posted now on Substack for you. We are on Substack because it's a free speech platform, because they don't kick people off, because it's easy to use too. I highly recommend it if you're thinking of starting your own newsletter, that Substack is a really good place to do it. Lots of good people there, including Seymour Hersh, the great investigative reporter. We were on Patreon and left. I think there's still a few people over there, and we're on PayPal as well, but Substack is our preferred because it is free speech. And you should know that although Substack is primarily a written platform, the money that you pledge to Substack supports this podcast. It is our major source of funding, so we can keep the lights on around here. I have a Twitter account, which is @WoodReporting. We get kind of raucous over there sometimes. I do it first thing in the morning, like 5 a.m. when I wake up and have my coffee. So I get caffeinated and then I sort of do it. And I have an Instagram account as well, and a website, which is trishwoodpodcast.com. And there's a biography of me there. If you don't know that much about me, you can go and find out about my career in journalism, how I've had a big change in how I view journalism and the world and politics too. So do please support us. I know a lot of people are asking you for that right now, but if you enjoy what we do, understand that I do have staff that I pay. Nobody works for free, and it's a full-time gig 7 days a week for most of us. So, well, not for the editor so much, but me and Dorothea mostly work long days. Anyway, thank you for that. And please consider us. We'd be grateful. Just before we go to Simon, I want to play for you a couple of TikTok-y type clips of Canadians who are either not able to make it financially or are thinking of leaving the country for that reason. I mean, it's really shocking. And I heard that a really good friend of mine, a DOP, or what we used to call a cameraman, is leaving the country and going back to Kenya because the place is so crazy politically and so hard to live in Toronto. I mean, you can't live in Toronto. Your choice is either a 200 square foot condo that costs $1 million or a $6 million house, or a project, right? That's it. There's not much in between. There is no middle class here. It is failing very, very quickly, and nobody's talking about it in a meaningful way. But a lot of really good young people are saying goodbye, which is terrible that we're losing these young, vibrant people. So we're going to play 2 of these TikTok testimonies back to back so you can understand what's happening to some of the people who live in this country, and specifically in Ontario.
So in Canada, we have some wonderful things that we want to share with the rest of the world. 1, we are one of the most expensive countries to live in currently. We have the highest amount of taxes and inflation. We have free health care. I don't think so. Actually, we don't have free health care. When you have a tax system the way we do, we pay every single month just as much as the Americans for our health care, whether you believe it or not. Health care costs in the United States are about $900 a month for a family. Do the math on how much you bring in as a family and how much taxes you pay on everything, not just your income. I think we'd probably end up saving money. Look at the price of a house here in Canada. $500,000 is an average price for a house right now, and that's American. You want to rent? Well, we're talking about $2,000 and up for a house, and for an apartment, about $1,600 a month and up.
I live in Ontario, and I need someone to tell me the pros and cons of living in America, because at this point, Canada just ain't it. It's just like not it anymore. Like the cost of living, it's too much. The wages are staying the same. I can't afford to move out. I'm 24 and I'm embarrassed that I can't move out. I can't leave my toxic household. So what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? What are the pros and cons of living in America? And everyone's like, oh, Canada's so great, this and that. It's not anymore. Free healthcare. You know how long it takes to see a mental health professional in Canada? A year. Dermatologist? A year. I might as well pay for private healthcare. The wait list is so long. Like, you don't even get the adequate help that you need. So where do we go at this point? Where are we supposed to live? Where can I live in a place where I'm able to enjoy my life as well? Because I'm not enjoying it here. I feel so utterly stuck. I don't know what to do anymore. You go to school, you get a degree, and you're still not guaranteed a job. $60K a year? That used to be like a decent amount of money. Not anymore.
Everything they said was true, except I would say, as far as the house prices and rents, in Toronto, triple, quadruple, quintuple, everything she just said. This is not good, people. And the media needs to be talking about it, and the Prime Minister needs to address it. And we have to start putting people first ahead of the developers and all the people who are raping this country, to the point where people graduating with degrees who want to work hard can't afford to live in the cities they grew up in. I'm seeing that a little bit now with my own kids. I don't want them to go, but how do you live in Toronto unless you've got legacy money of some sort, which in my family we don't. So it's terrible. We're going to hear some more of those next week as well. And right now we're going to move into, as I said, my interview with Simon Elmer. And we're going to talk about this whole kind of globalist takeover of our lives, because part of the problem with these young people who can't get ahead in Toronto and elsewhere is that the transfer of wealth is all to the people at the top, and they are purposely trying to destroy the middle class. I'm convinced of that now, and you guys know me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, right? I'm a totally evidence-based person, but there's a point where, you know what, nobody's this inept. And the fact that the media is not calling it out tells me that there may be something else afoot here. None of it makes any sense to me that they would throw Canadians and Americans, so many hardworking people, under the bus. So here is my conversation with Simon Elmer from the UK. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Hello, Trish. Thank you for having me back. Good to speak with you again.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you too. I think a lot about our last conversation, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you back, because I think we probably can't be talking about this enough. And the reason I feel that way is because I think people are very destabilized right now. We say that a lot on the show, but people are coming to realize there's been a shift, there's been a change, their world has changed, the bad thing has already happened. We're living in a different era than we were, let's say, like 4 years ago. And so I don't think you can stop talking about it. And your writing on this subject, especially about the biosecurity state, really, really resonates with my listeners. So let's go back to basics here. Tell me what you mean when you say the biosecurity state.
An easy question to start with, Trish. Yeah. Yeah. By the biosecurity state, I mean a kind of the nexus of what began with regulations imposed on us on the justification of tackling this supposed pandemic. The technologies of what have been called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but also the programs, things like, maybe we can talk about it, things like digital ID, central bank digital currency, and the kind of requirements and restrictions that are going to be imposed on us, not in a legal sense, but through this model of biosecurity. In other words, saving us from ourselves under things like Agenda 2030, which is a kind of an environmental kind of program. And also, the other thing that I'm kind of very interested in is because the way I've described this is that we're going through a revolution in Western capitalism since March 2020, when the lockdown happened, even though it sort of began before that. And there's a fundamental shift, I think, in the ideologies that are accompanying these programs, these technologies, these changes to our forms of governance. I don't think anyone would claim that we are living in any form of democracy anymore. We're being ruled by these kind of global or international technocracies. So these together are a kind of a nexus of changes which have happened very, very, very quickly and which are all interdependent upon each other. The unified term I use to describe that is the global biosecurity state. And I use that term, one, because of this phrase biosecurity, but also to show that these things are not separate. It isn't coincidental, for instance, that this idea of trans rights has suddenly become become the new orthodoxy, or that digital ideas suddenly come in. These things are all interconnected, and that's what I'm trying to describe in my writings.
Well, when you just to really break it down further, what is the bio part of the biosecurity state? What are you actually referring to?
Well, the term biopolitics was introduced, I guess, into Western philosophy by the French philosopher Michel Foucault in the late 70s. And he was describing what he saw as a shift that came about around about the time of the French Revolution, or also the American Revolution, in which forms of governance moved from a kind of a juridical framework. That is, you make laws, if people break them, there are punishments consequent upon them. That could be the death of the person breaking them, or simply their imprisonment. And the ultimate arbitrator of that was, back then, the king, and eventually Parliament. So you have a kind of a punitive model of how we are governed. There are rules, there are laws, you break them, you are punished. He saw what happened since then, particularly under this new kind of rubric of human rights, is we moved into a form of governance which was interested in surveying, monitoring, measuring, hierarchizing, and ultimately controlling human life itself. So it's a biopolitics. And a lot of the mechanisms that he spent his life describing, which have sort of got onto a new level, kind of on steroids at the moment, is about controlling human bodies. You control people by controlling their bodies. The most ultimate, the most simple application of that is, unless you are injected with experimental gene therapies, you lose your human rights. But there's other ones coming in as well, particularly around the environmental kind of crisis, if you want to call it that. There's, again, an equally manufactured crisis. That restrictions on our movements, on our expenditures, on our consumptions, et cetera, on our human rights, are being justified in order to save us from this crisis. But it's going to do it through control of our bodies. So limits to things like 15-minute cities, to movements in cars and so on. So biopolitics is ultimately about controlling people's bodies as a way of controlling people themselves.
See, I have a question about what is actually underpinning this. And it might be a stupid question because I'm not sure history ever answers this. But the people who are enforcing this idea that we're living in a biosecurity state and that that's where they want us to be, and they're doing things to ensure that that happens, and that's clear. I don't think you can argue that. It's clear. But here's my question to you. Are these people who didn't think that way and have been corrupted by going to World Economic Forum, like let's say Sadiq Khan, who I believe is the mayor of London, who is a bad purveyor of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he's doing all this stuff with the ULEZ and the you can't drive in the city, all this stuff, right? Would he always have thought that way? Or are the people like our prime minister and Joe Biden and Tony Fauci, what is it about them individually that made them go along with something that's so obviously anti-democratic collectively?
They're politicians.
So is it that cynical though? That, I mean, really?
I mean, Sadiq Khan is he's a mayor of a major city, and mayors tend to be deeply corrupt people, don't they?
Oh, they do.
They've kind of got a sort of an awkward relationship to power because they don't have. They're constantly appealing to government for kind of revenues. At least our one is over here. But at the same time, they have an enormous power over people. I mean, recently there was a judicial review of whether Sadiq Khan had the authority to impose the ULEZ scheme, that is the ultra-low emission zone, which is now extended or about to extend to the whole of London, which means if you leave your home in a car, which is not an electric car or certain emission levels, you have to pay sort of £12.50 every time you leave, or more if you're driving a truck. And the legal thing was basically they came down and said, yes, he does have the right to do this. But no one actually questioned whether there's any sort of logical or realistic justification for doing so. I think politicians and people in power are simply interested in power. And if believing that, for instance, a man who declares himself a woman is a woman gives that person power over people, or declaring that by changing your 1980s car, your 1990s car, that's the one that we've got, and buying a whole new car whose materials are mined in Bolivia, which is made in China, which is then transported halfway across the world into London, is somehow going to save the planet from global warming. These are kind of irrelevant, whether they believe them or not, or is I think irrelevant. It simply extends power. That's why I think biopolitics is the correct term to describe this nexus of regulations, laws, ideologies, and programs, because it's ultimately about giving control of the people in power over us, increasing it much more. And the primary condition of that is to erase the framework of human rights under which we've lived for sort of the last 200 years. Flawed as they may be, human rights are no longer on the table. They're always conditional. They've always been conditional, but now those conditions have simply been eradicated. So I think the question, I get what you're saying, and it's one I get asked a lot. The question for me is not why powerful and corrupt people will act corruptly in order to increase their power. The real question is why the rest of the population is going along with it. It's compliance, which is the problem. I think we need to address not, the corruption of the powerful. That seems to be kind of a given throughout history.
Yeah, well, I did a little bit of reading about that very thing this morning early when I got up to prepare for today, and I think Canada is a very fine example of how we should be looking at a citizenry that went along with massive, massive corruption that led to something that those of us who are awake almost can't bear. I mean, I know a professional colleague of mine, we used to call them cameramen, now they're called DOPs, director of photography, who's he's moving back to Kenya, away from Canada. And there's a bunch of TikTok videos that have just come out saying young people can't live here anymore. It's really dire. It's actually quite dire. And we saw who would enable a lot during the trucker convoy, who did, in my view, a very noble thing on behalf of, they stuck their necks out on behalf of us all. There was a level of hatred directed at them. Let's forget the prime minister, who's completely corrupt, but by their fellow citizens, that really scared me, because it was based on an ideological way of framing working people that seems to have taken hold, right? So I've come to the conclusion after years of saying, how did anybody go along with those terrible regimes? How did that happen? Now I know how that happened, right? I've seen it happen here.
Recently, based on the book I published last year, The Road to Fascism, I kind of collected a whole lot of incidents, not individual incidents, but examples from around the world, from around the West, around the imposition of these vaccine mandates, these gene therapy mandates, and the punishments that were made for those who didn't comply, which of course included what was going on in Canada as well, and particularly so there, kind of the enormous level of violence from the police and the paramilitaries and so on. And because I promote my stuff on Twitter, I've also got those linked to a kind of a thread that I put up. It's quite a big thread with a series of very powerful sort of short footage of, for instance, the police beating up the Freedom Convoy in Canada and so on. And I've also got the ones that came in Melbourne, Australia, which was kind of really extraordinary, I think, to everyone, because that's, I guess, like Canada, it's a kind of a wealthy, well-off, sort of happy sort of country, certainly in the perception of the rest of the world. Yeah. And you had, kind of people who looked like they were invading Iraq or something, kind of going around shooting rubber bullets into their fellow Australians. And I put this up, and a woman responded to me and said, "This simply isn't true. I've got a friend in Australia, and she said there was nothing going on. It simply was difficult to buy alcohol at the local off license.
Wow.
And it suddenly came back to me, that famous quote, which has been going around for a while now, from George Orwell's 1984, where he says, the final command of the party was to deny the evidence of your own ears and eyes. And that seemed to me a kind of account of that. There seems to be at the moment a lot of people denying, not even that, we talked about this last time, not only the complicity that they had in what you're kind of talking about, this sort of denigration and ostracization of a huge swathe of society who were suddenly denounced as murderers and so on and so forth. I think it's gone beyond that now. I think people are actually saying this never happened. This didn't happen. It reminds me of that famous series of articles written by the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard about the Iraq War. And he said, the Iraq War never happened. It's not going to happen. It didn't happen. It was just a sort of a spectacle which was created by the media and governments. It became, people going home at night, turning on their TV and seeing kind of, what they call them smart strikes and stuff like that. I really think everything now is so experienced and consumed through the media and through this completely captured, kind of media world, that people can be told this literally didn't happen. The same way they say, no, this is not happening in front of your eyes. They can say that it didn't happen. It really, we really have got into 1984 territory, and his famous line that, he who controls the present controls the past, and those who control the past control the future. I wrote in my book that the future that is being written for us at the moment is being written from this rewritten past. Recently we've had these things like Roald Dahl and James Bond books. I mean, so far it's not massively important, but they're actually being written in accordance with the dictates of the present, the ideological dictates.
Yeah.
And it's not going to stop there. It's definitely not going to stop there.
Somebody said to me, maybe it was you, but somebody really smart said to me, I never forgot it. Start buying books, made, paper books, because then they can't be altered. And those of us who, I already have a massive library. It drives my family crazy. I just keep buying and buying because I like the way they look aside from reading them. But because we have to archive the truth, and the new digital world is changing everything. With a keystroke, they're changing Roald Dahl under these sort of dictates of the new ideology, as you say. And it was put to me that buying paper books is a radical act because you're preserving something. Yeah. Like we'll be standing in the street 20 years from now holding up our volumes of something and saying, no, this is what it really says, right?
Let me tell you something, which you won't believe. In February this year, a few years ago, in response to the 7/7 bombings over here, which was kind of itself a kind of an echo of the 9/11, the government passed yet another, we had about 20 of these in 10 years, a counter-terrorism act. And under that act, it created a program called Prevent. And it's meant to be a counter-terrorist program, and it made an imposition on educators, so schools, doctors, police, employers, to look out for what they called extremism. Now, it was justified as being, we have to counter the threat of fundamental Islamic beliefs and links to so on and so forth. But this February, it emerged in Parliament that the Prevent program had identified the following authors as indicators. And that is, if you read these online, or if you're known to have purchased these books by these authors, you had been flagged for right-wing extremism. Now, the authors are William Shakespeare, Milton, Marvel, Kipling, Tennyson, Tolkien, and George Orwell himself.
Wow.
This sounds incredible, but it's not because this week I was myself contacted. I'm from Architects of Social Housing, which is a community interest company. And there is a regulator of community interest companies in this country. And they contacted us saying, we've been accused of promoting politically extremist ideas. And they're threatening to shut us down. Now, this is the third time this has happened since 2020. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to sort of reduce what it is to ridicule. But I kind of wrote back to them and said, well, I have read Tolkien and I have read Orwell and I do read Shakespeare. Is that the kind of extremism you're accusing me of? It sounds ludicrous because it is ludicrous, but it's not when people have got control over you. That level of censorship isn't what you do on social media. It's actually whether you can run your company or not.
Well, I'm surprised you haven't been debanked, right? Like our old friend Nigel Farage. I mean, thank God for him. Shouldn't we cheer? He did the right thing. He went on TV and risked ridicule to point this out. And look at all the people who came out of the woodwork saying, I too have been debanked, and how badly Coots and Nat West, they just completely revealed what absolute buffoons and corrupt monsters they are. You know, the dossier that he got his mitts on, 40 pages, looked like it was written by a 16-year-old social justice warrior's high school term paper. I mean, it was completely stupid.
Yeah, it's been a big thing over here. It's unfortunately, I don't think many people have made the link between that and what your finance minister did to the truckers that we were just talking about, when they effectively did the same thing. And also nobody, well, not nobody, but it's not done in the media. This is precisely what central bank digital currency is being developed for. It is programmable. And over here, the Bank of England, I think we're going to call it the London pound or something like that, or the UK pound. It says it's going to be programmable to promote programs which are seen as socially beneficial, but also to punish behavior which the government, or perhaps even the Bank of England, regards as not beneficial, as antisocial. So someone says to me, someone writes to them and says, well, I don't like architects of social housing. Simon Elmer has written something which I considered extremist. Suddenly, my digital bank currency is suspended until I go through some sort of process. And that process won't be in a court of law. It will be written into the digital currency itself. So that was very interesting, the Farage thing, but it's not an isolated incident. This is precisely the model of governance which is being put in place at the moment with things like digital central bank digital currency and the other apparatus around it, which of course includes digital ID.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing I wonder, I'm a person who always wants to know the why of people's behavior, right? And I guess what's frightening about this is that the people doing these absurd and dangerous things don't understand how terrible they look. I mean, do they really think they're being good people when they close down somebody's bank account, or are they just kind of wielding power for power's sake? I don't get it.
I think, the first collection of my articles was called Virtue and Terror. It was that phrase used by Robespierre, when he was head of the Committee for Public Health during the French Revolution, which basically became the de facto government of France. And it's very interesting, the Committee for Public Health is exactly how we were run for 2 years under lockdown. Our government basically became, a health organization and also a safety organization as well. The two were conflated together. And anything which was said, this is not good for public health, therefore you could take any kind of control and stuff. And Robespierre sort of famously said that during periods of revolutionary change, governments ruled by virtue and terror. And we were ruled, and we still are ruled by that, I think. People are they're required to demonstrate at every moment of every day their public virtue, their virtue signaling. That phrase was absolutely spot on even before this happened.
Yeah, it's the best one ever, I think. Yeah, it's terrific. It's perfect.
But also, they're ruled by terror as well. You're encouraged, you're obliged to show your compliance with these demonstrations of virtue. But if you don't, then your bank account is suspended. You'll be anathematized and stuff. So I think myself, to answer your question, I think these people think they're acting virtuously. Wow. Robespierre said, virtue without terror is impotent, I think was the word he used. Oh. So virtue has to have terror behind it. It's the velvet cosh, isn't it? It's the iron glove and the velvet glove or whatever. To answer you, I think they definitely think they're acting virtuously. There's nothing as despotic, tyrannous as someone who believes they're acting virtuously.
What's interesting about the culture in this moment, and many, many things are, but one of the things has been, have you over in the UK discovered this chap? I think his name is Oliver Anthony, who's got this new song, and it's called Richmond, North of Richmond. It's a I don't think he's from Appalachia, but it's like he plays a dobro, and it's a real kind of cri de coeur for the working man. Brilliant. Everybody's latched onto it. I wept the first time I heard it. It was like an old kind of Woody Guthrie style deal, right? And it's hit the top of all the charts. It's gone totally viral. Totally, people are going absolutely mental for it in the best way. And it's kind of like, as an old lefty, I mean, which is to say I no longer identify that way anymore, and I am old, but I it's hard for me to see the other side demonizing this guy. I mean, he's basically saying the working people in this country got screwed over. McKinsey outsourced all our jobs. None of us can make a living doing what we do for a living anymore. I mean, it's a true statement on how the kind of working class or America's underclass are really being screwed. And it's how can anybody argue with this song? How can that even happen, right? And I see now on Twitter they're accusing him of being anti-Semitic or something. Like the campaign against this poor guy has already started. It was almost like on time. You could almost calculate how long it would be before they started with the ad hominem attacks on him. It's just ridiculous. It's absurd.
Yeah, it is. I was writing about this the other day about it is absurd. Everyone who just stands outside a line gets accused of the same thing. They're anti-Semitic, there's conspiracy theorists. I don't know, how does it still work? How is it that the general populace is kind of saying, well, we've heard all this before. How many times can you accuse people of the same thing, even though they're speaking about completely different things?
Yeah.
I think all ideologies have a kind of kernel of nonsense at the heart of them, of absurdity. I think that's the nature of ideology. Yeah. Every single one has that. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. It exists to cover up its lie at the heart of it. I think at the moment, though, the lie is so big. The lies are so big. Mm-hmm. The lies that we're all going to be. They keep putting back within 5 years or 10 years or whatever. The world's good. What have we got now? Global boiling, haven't we? The lies are so absurd that the ideology has to be kind of equal it. The ideology of absurdity. So now, if I actually, the other day I was listening to, what's his name? Ian Plimer, the Australian geologist, a man of immense kind of authority and knowledge who's worked in the, kind of the energy industry and stuff. And he's kind of pointing out very basic things of his science, as a geologist. Things like, God knows how many millions of years ago, the level of carbon in the atmosphere was 20 times what it was today. And that was during a ice age. What does that tell us about the relationship between carbon levels in the atmosphere and global warming? It tells us that there is no correlation between the two. Now, either this man, who is a kind of one of the most eminent, in his field in the world, it's kind of internationally known, either he's just lost his marbles and everything that his science has, in the knowledge around it, has been based on for, hundreds of years, is now suddenly wrong. Or the people like the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which, as he points out, is not a scientific organization, but a political one, either they're lying. Now, we've had this over and over again. You had Bakti in the German scientist, one of the most eminent, most cited scientists in German scientific history. He was taken to court, wasn't he, and denounced as, anti-Semitic and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Either these figures are either eminent in the field and the science which they are, one small cog in, all that's suddenly wrong, or the people who are lying to us are lying. Now, I know which I believe. I do believe in science. Anyway, I don't believe in it, but I believe there are scientific principles, and they don't suddenly get thrown out of the window just because of a bunch of people at the UN or the World Health Organization or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suddenly tell us that this is all lies. The level of the lies is so big that the only way that the people enforcing this can respond to it is by saying, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're anti-Semitic. So I think, in a way there's something good about this, hopefully, although I'm not holding my breath, people will begin finally to wake up and say, you know what, calling people conspiracy theorists and anti-Semitic is not really an answer. And I don't really want to live in a society, in a world where that's the way we're governed, because that's a fascist world. That's the way fascism works.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll survive it. I mean, every week I'm looking for something hopeful to say. And we did do a very hopeful show last week on this new broadsheet that Walter Kern and a bunch of really clever literary Americans have put out And it's news not from the bi-coastal lunatic asylum cities, but from the heartland, but also not in a fetishistic, cutesy way, right? It's actually a serious thing. And that was really, really good news. But every time there's good news, then I get whacked upside the head by some awful bit. I mean, even just reading how the left is rejoicing over the charges against Trump makes me, this is honest, Simon. I want to put a MAGA hat on and dance down the street because, like the more they go after him, the more I feel I have to defend him, which is probably irrational on some level. But I hate the dishonesty and the politicization of what they're doing, right? It's 10 times worse than anything he did or could ever do, in my opinion.
I mean, he's an unpleasant fellow, but then most politicians are. But as far as I can work out, he's the only U.S. president who hasn't started a war since the Second World War.
Yeah,
and he actually withdrew people, withdrew troops out of Afghanistan and stuff. The left is a sewer, unfortunately. I mean, at the moment in the UK, we've got our elections coming up sort of next year. And the bitching and moaning between the two parties, the Conservatives and the Labour, which is kind of equivalent to your slightly equivalent. Well, not yours. Sorry, I'm talking like your US, but Republican and Democrat and so on. And
liberal here, or actually, New Democrat is probably more like the Labour. Yeah,
but they're not talking about the issues you were talking about the complete immiseration of not just the working class, but the middle classes as well.
Yeah.
The fact that this vast trillions and trillions of dollars of quantitative easing globally is, basically meant that our grandchildren are going to be paying us off, forever. The destruction of healthcare around the world on the justification of combating a single virus and all this sort of stuff. None of these issues have come up. This is why I'm constantly still sort of bashing my head against the wall. I've got this thing where I say, lest we forget.
Yeah.
And I put up what this government, and it's not just this government, it's this parliament as well. A legislature who have backed every single measure which was done supposedly in response to the pandemic, and which is being taken forward again through the environmental kind of fundamentalism. The other day people are putting up exactly how much the government is promising to pay to bring about this chimera of net zero. I mean, net zero will actually kill billions of people around the world. There's not a doubt about that. But none of this is being discussed. It's just about silly things like, Trumpism and stuff.
Yeah, silly stuff.
The left seems to think that this is an issue. And what the real issue is there's so many of them, isn't there? But for instance, what does net zero actually mean? What does the defeat of Russia mean? Is that going to come about? These are issues which are never discussed. The other day I was looking at, I've been kind of writing a lot about, giving podcasts about what I call environmental fundamentalism and the kind of Agenda 2030 thing. And we had a kind of a brief and terrifying demonstration of what it actually means in 2021. Under the guidance of the WEF, the government of Sri Lanka, as I'm sure you know, imposed kind of net zero policies. They called it organic agriculture. Yeah. What it meant was that they didn't use pesticides and they didn't use fertilizers. And within a year, rice production in what was called, Sri Lanka was called the Rice Bowl of the East, had dropped by 50%. People were starving. The inflation went up to something like 86%. And guess what happened? They had a bailout from the World Bank. They had to default on their payments. The IMF and the World Bank came in. They set up a consortium of creditors. And guess who was the lead creditor?
BlackRock? Was it BlackRock? Yeah. It's always BlackRock.
They've done exactly what they're doing in the Ukraine. They've handed over the assets of one of the great agricultural kind of producers in the world, who's now in the hands of global US asset managers. Is that just Sri Lanka, just for a minute, because if I remember correctly, is that the story where the peasants actually took over the palace and were swimming in the pool and stuff? I love that story. It was the government, but it was too late. The government had sort of signed all these kind of bailouts. This is the model. This is what stakeholder capitalism is. Use the term by the WEF, the World Economic Forum. It means that states are no longer in control of their resources. This is what sustainable development goals are designed to do. They're designed to load countries and governments and corporations and companies with debt in order to meet these kind of completely spurious criteria. And when they default, they come in and they gobble everything up. these are the issues that we should be discussing, and why any governments that we might be daft enough to elect into power, what is their position on this? Because this is the new model of capitalism. This is the revolution.
I keep, kind of yammering on about this here and then on my radio show that I do. And we need, the citizenry needs to fully understand what's happened and how to deal with it in what's left of our democracies. Not much, but what you're saying about them these issues not being on the ballot. I mean, they're not. We just did an election here. Hardly anybody voted. We've elected a new socialist mayor in a city that's dying from, there's homelessness stuff. We're taking in tons of refugees with no place to put them. Nobody thinks that through. We're denaming a street for $8 million because the person maybe was associated with, but we're not sure. I mean, it's completely crazy. And none of the things that we wanted, like the 15-minute city argument, what are you going to do about these traffic calming things, this terrible, none of that was on the ballot, right? None of it. So I think that, and I'm going to talk to some people with money about this, because we need to put up a website that is like a citizen's manifesto, regardless of where you're left or right, whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. But where they know to say to somebody, gee, you want to be the prime minister. Are you going to be jetting off to Davos or not? Because if you are, we don't want that. Like, we have to start asking those questions in a meaningful way. The media is not going to do it, as you know, because they're part of it. So we have to enable people with little bits of information and questions to be asked and ways to insert themselves. I will tell you, and you probably saw this, Simon, at the WEF when these citizen journalists and guys from Rebel News here in Canada were doing jump interviews on people like Albert Bourla. I was so happy because no one asked these guys, any of them, a hard question, right? So the media is not going to help us out. I think we have to enable people to find ways to get into these venues and write their own op-eds and do their own communicating with politicians and just say, if you want my vote, you're not going to do these things because we don't want it. We don't want it.
Yeah. I mean, there are sort of good. I mean, a month ago or something, in the European Union, actually, there was a kind of a conference held. I think it was the third one, actually, called the COVID or the coronavirus conference or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was very dominated, but you probably saw it, I don't know, but it was dominated by doctors in particular, but they could have went for hours and hours and hours, and you had doctors presenting all the information about what was completely wrong about everything around the coronavirus.
Yeah.
The severity of it, the measures to stop it, the vaccines and the gene therapies and all that sort of stuff. And it was very, very powerful. And it was organized by, I've forgotten her name, but that German MEP, member of the European Parliament.
Christine Anderson?
Who's done a fantastic job kind of standing up and stuff. And it was really encouraging to see it. I mean, of course, there was nobody there, nobody from
right.
Union, but they managed to sort of get a foot in that kind of door of authority. Someone who's I know, Mick Hudson, who's kind of from Panda, pandemic research and so on, and he spoke very well, and it was very, very good. I kind of said to him afterwards, I said it was very, very good, but it was too much. Hopefully next time, it was too much about refuting this coronavirus as a medical crisis.
Yeah,
it was never a public health crisis. What it didn't address is its biopolitical dimension. That is what is being done on the basis of the consensus created by people believing they were facing some terrible global pandemic.
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I'm sort of writing about now. I'm putting together a book, which I hope to publish before the end of the year, and get those Christmas sales in, with which I call them the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And they are, I kind of mentioned them, the first one is digital ID. The second one is Agenda 2030, so around the kind of environmental fundamentalism stuff. The third one is the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. And the fourth one is central bank digital currency. These are all being justified in one way or another, explicitly or implicitly, by that coronavirus crisis and the consensus it received. And that's what we really, I think, need to be talking about now. And the reason I mention that is when we're talking, as we are, about what can we do? How can we open up people's eyes to this? How can we combat this within the last days of democracy?
Mm-hmm.
which is what we're living through at the moment.
Yeah.
And the reason we need to do that is because, and we need to make people aware of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is a very dramatic phrase, but these really are. Because when they are implemented, when we have a system of universal digital ID, when we have central bank digital currency, which all currency goes through that, and there's no such thing as cash. When the measures and the restrictions, the drastic genocidal restrictions of Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2050 are in place, and when the World Health Organization has the power to declare a pandemic whenever they want, and then use enforcement mechanisms, which includes the military of the US, it doesn't matter then what we think or what we vote for, because we will not be living in anything even resembling a democracy. Yeah. It's very, very important that 4 people are made aware of what these 4 interdependent horsemen mean, because they do mean the apocalypse, and it's very important we know that before we really don't have any democracy left. As I said, we've got an election coming up next year. Next year, yes, next year, and we need to. People need to be aware that we need to get these issues on the board, and not the sort of silly things that we've been talking about. Identity politics, whether they like Trump or not, and all this kind of other distractions from the real fundamental changes to not just our society, because we're not one society. You're in Canada, I'm in the UK. It's to the West primarily.
Yes.
But of course, the West still sort of just about runs the world. But of course, is that going to be in China and Russia and so on and so forth? That's what we need to get onto. We need to get into the political conversation while we still have a politics, because my fear is we're actually moving into a post-political environment where there's simply going to be governance and not politics.
I agree with you. And you know why? Just going back to the election in Toronto, there were like 5 or 6 candidates. The person who won was the progressive whose husband used to, and who I knew and liked very much back in the day, who was the head of the New Democratic Party. The rest of the candidates were right of center, maybe one center, if that even means anything, but they all split the vote, right? So there's this one powerful progressive who, right? And then the other ones split the vote. And I wanted to sort of say, hey, you guys get in a room and figure out who's going to run against Olivia Chow, because if you're all running, we're screwed. And that's exactly what happened. And nobody voted because nobody believes in it anyway. Yeah. And so I agree with you that we live in a post-democratic world. And my particular bag that I bang on about constantly is the failure of journalism. And I want people to fully understand that without journalism, there is no democracy. I mean, it's not that. And we see that, right? In the States and here to some degree, they are installing presidents and prime ministers because they hide the bad stuff, like the Hunter Biden laptop. What an example that is, right? And they invent the good stuff, like they pretend that Joe Biden isn't senile. They pretend he's not corrupt. They, all those things, right? So they're picking our leaders right now, and people need to fully understand that if they're confused, it's because they're being lied to every day by people who have an agenda that has nothing to do with fairness or democratic principles. We're in it now. I mean, I think we are post-democracy right now. I agree with you.
We're definitely post-democracy. We've still got something of a politics. I mean, politics as, there's different types of politics. It doesn't all have to be democratic, but politics is a space in which there's debate, there's contestation, there is engagement in some sort of process in which the people somehow, maybe not through a democracy. I mean, Christ, we haven't had a real democracy. There's no such thing as a real democracy. Democracy is always degrees of flaws and so on. We're moving into a place where I don't think that's even going to be the question. There are various means in which, if you look up the definition of what a democracy is, one of them is a legislature which oversees the decisions of a government. The other one is a judiciary, which does the same. And the other one is, the fourth estate, which is the media, which does it. And all 3 of those have utterly failed to hold our governments to account. And you can't say we've got a democracy then, when we've got this failure. The media has been absolutely captured. The judiciary has been, in this country, I could give you examples. It ultimately ends up with some 80-year-old judge who went to Eton sort of deciding whether Sadiq Khan is allowed to impose a poor tax, effectively, on anyone who wants to drive a car in London. a city of 9 million people.
Wow.
It's kind of ludicrous. But the legislature as well. I was talking about this recently with someone on a podcast, and we're trying to talk about how do we get to the point. I saw someone the other day use a phrase which I use a lot. That is that our parliament is the worst in living memory. It's the worst of my lifetime easily. It's probably the worst in living memory.
Was that Dellingpole you were talking to? It sounds like Dellingpole.
About this because he loves talking about it, and I mean that very seriously. I'm someone who grew up under I look back on the parliaments of the governments, the cabinets of Thatcher and John Major, and I wouldn't say Tony Blair, almost with fondness and stuff. And these, they were corrupt, but they were capable. The guy who ran the economy sort of did have a background in economy. The people we've got now are simply. I think one of the things is this is a kind of a bugbear of mine about the enormous damage done by identity politics. The Labour Party in this country is primarily elected the members of Parliament, not because they know anything about the world or that they can read a legal document, which I think should be an obligatory for someone who is there to oversee legislation, or because they've got any knowledge about, for instance, the economy or anything like that. They're picked because of their identity. That is what their race is, what their sexuality is, what their gender is, what their opinions on things like gender, blah, 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 all that stuff. And the Labour Party as an opposition is picked almost exclusively on that. And then they'll bring in a couple of people who might know somebody once gone to a course at the LSE on economics or something like that. But because of this, we've got a legislature now, which is, I think, not simply corrupt. They're incompetent. They don't have.
They are incompetent. Yeah. I look. Yeah.
Read a document like the Coronavirus Act or the huge number of new acts that are coming in at the moment. They simply don't have the ability to do. And that's based not on any kind of arrogance on my part. I listen to the debates they have in Parliament, and I listen to the debates they have in committees when the legislation goes through the kind of the process when they really pick it apart, and they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They're not really politicians. They're simply figures of identity politics who go out and rustle up support from their local communities to vote for them so that their party gets into power. And that's brought us to a very, very dangerous place because we've lost one of the three primary oversights that keeps a democracy democratic. And that's why we're not in one at the moment.
Well, you also have to ask, though, why they're being voted for. I think it was Churchill who said that the worst argument for democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter, which
he would say that.
Yeah, which I don't agree. That's a great line, though. I use it whenever I can. But what I'm saying that suggests is just that these idiots keep getting voted in by somebody. Somebody's voting for them, right? And I understand that happens through manipulation. I understand it happens through a corrupt media. But at some point, we have to look at ourselves and saying, why are we voting for these people? Why aren't we asking them to be better and do better and actually do what we ask them to do instead of what Klaus Schwab is talking about, right?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how much your listeners will be aware of who we've got over here at the next election. We've got Rishi Sunak.
Yeah. What's up with Rishi? Tell me about Rishi.
I mean, Rishi's like a kind of a pizza delivery boy. He kind of walks around with his little sleeves rolled up, kind of gazing longingly into. He's a complete. He's nobody. And then on the other hand, we've got this very peculiar figure who's joined the Labour Party for some reason. He was a lawyer and the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. He's an establishment figure. He's got the Order of the Garter and all this sort of stuff. Which is I've forgotten his name just now. What's his name? Help me out here.
Keir Starmer. Yeah.
When you're presented with those two, who on earth do you vote for? And I think what will happen is nobody will vote. Yeah. We're moving to a US style of democracy, the facade of democracy, in which very, very small portions of the electorate actually bother voting. And I think in the next election, I would bet my hat that we're going to have the lowest turnout ever. Not because the election itself is, we're not in this absolutely kind of crucial moment in British history and history of the West, but simply because I don't think most people could actually, look in the mirror when they get home after voting for either of those two people.
Yeah, and Rishi's got a super wealthy wife, right? Isn't she a billionaire from one of India's?
Yeah, he's married. He's married to the daughter of, I can't remember his name, but an Indian billionaire who happens quite by coincidence to be runs a company who's kind of exporting one of the biggest companies, which is developing digital ID globally.
Oh God, no! Please say
And he
this.
himself's he's got shares in Moderna.
Ugh.
I mean, the corruption is just, you kind of expect that. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
But
it's so blatant with Joe Biden right now. I mean, how many more whistleblowers do we need? It's ridiculous that he's still. And you know what? Here's the thing: the Republicans, they keep digging this stuff up, and it's devastating. And then they don't do anything about it, right? They send a really mean letter to somebody. They're always sending these mean letters to people, and nothing happens. Like, impeach him already. Do it. And they just don't respond. It must be very disheartening for their people, the people that vote for them, that they're so.
There used to be a time where if you got caught, we all knew politicians are doing all these dodgy deals and horrific things, kind of, whatever it is, whether it's financial or sexual or whatever.
Yeah.
And they get caught, and it's like, okay, you've got caught, now you have to resign. We know you're doing it because that's why you're in this position, because that's what you do. It's kind of part of the job.
Yeah.
And we didn't like that. But when you get caught, when the media caught you with your pants down, or you suddenly got taking a brown paper bag to promote an arms company or something like that, when that happened, you resigned. And if you did it really badly, your government would fall.
Yeah.
In this country, I think Boris Johnson was the kind of the watershed in that. There was a point where I don't think that guy could have done anything, and whenever he falls to resign, I was wrong, because eventually he kind of eventually
over a party, though. It was over a party. It was ridiculous.
Ridiculous stuff. But it does seem now that there's no accountability. There's no accountability in public life in general. And I think
true. That is 1,000% true. I completely
think
agree.
The reason for that is not simply that the electorate have sort of got used to the kind of the exponential increase in the levels of corruption. I think it's because governments go down. When Thatcher went out on the poll tax, that was the thing that everyone sort of said she went down on. It's not actually the people who congregated in Trafalgar Square and sort of said we're not going to pay. It's also the people who are actually in power. And I think nowadays the governments we've got, I think we talked about this last time, they really are, they're the administrators of legislation, programs, technologies, all the things I kind of talked about, of this global biosecurity state. They're the administrators of that, but the real decisions are being made by the people upstairs, the people who run these international technocracies, the people at the
Larry
UN.
Fink.
About people like Larry Fink, for instance. They're the people who are actually running the world. And if Rishi Sunak walked around looking like a pizza delivery boy, it doesn't matter, because whether he gets in or Keir Starmer gets in, it makes absolutely no difference. They're both going to impose central bank digital currency. They're both going to subject UK economy to the requirements of Agenda 2030. They're both going to impose digital ID. They're both going to sign up to the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. So it's indifferent, I think. They're indifferent to who gets into so-called power, because they're not in power. And I think the more outrageous the revelations about Biden or Sunak or whatever, nobody gives a damn. The people in power don't give a damn, because it just keeps the rest of us thinking that we're engaging in politics by saying, oh, did you see what Donald Trump got up to the other day?
Yeah, that's what would they do without Donald Trump? And you guys also have had an interesting experience. We've had two high-profile men, one of them a BBC dude, and the other one from a morning show, who were caught in these kind of dodgy sexual deals, right? Yeah. And everybody went pretty hard on that. Like, they were like, "Oh, it's terrible." What was his name? Schofield? Is it Peter?
Yeah,
Schofield?
Yeah, Schofield. Yeah.
Schofield. Yeah. And then who was the guy from BBC? Edward something.
Hugh Edwards, perhaps.
Hugh Edwards. That's who it was. Yeah. And so yeah, it was well done. So it was wall to wall coverage on these things, which are, they were terrible, and men shouldn't act that way. People shouldn't act that way, and whatever. But they went harder on them and got more news coverage than the other stuff that's really important in our lives. And I am seeing, the only thing I can say about that, about how I assess that, is that the guardrails of morality keep widening, right? So it's only a hop and a skip and a jump from twerking, gyrating trans people in front of children, right, to out and out corruption. And we keep these shocking things that 5 years ago we would have said, what are you? Well, that'll never happen. They're happening and we have to accept it. And then there's the next bad thing. We have to accept it. We've been hit with so many things in the last 4 years that we have to accept. And that not accepting it makes us bad people. That I hate to use the boiling frog, but I do feel like we are the boiling frog, and that it's we're simmering now because so many frameworks around us have been changed. What even is good. And we don't go after politicians. Joe Biden should be scrummed by an aggressive media out of office. They should surround him and hound him with difficult questions until he does the honorable thing and steps down, right? But that's not happening, and maybe people don't even think what he's doing is all that bad. But I think it's a larger event that's describing maybe the death of 1,000 cuts of the moral framework we inhabit now.
Yeah, it's slightly different to what you're talking about, but the kind of the revelations. What was his name? I've forgotten. The journalist now, the US journalist, with immense kind of authority, he did the My Lake massacre and stuff.
Oh, Seymour Hersh.
Seymour Hersh,
yeah.
And he kind of came out with all this stuff about, about the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah.
But also about, the kind of the threat to kind of demolish the dam and all this sort of stuff. And, China keep their cards pretty close to their chest, or their mahjong tablets close to their chest. And they kind of came out and sort of said, very openly, the US has got a history of lying, which is kind of the understatement of the millennia.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of basically said, look, we know you blew this up. You've sabotaged the infrastructure of Europe in what is, Germany's meant to be, your ally and stuff. You're now basically, the whole kind of Ukraine thing is such a, it's not even a farce. It's kind of crazy. And, back in the, I don't know, in the 60s or 70s or something, like even in the 80s maybe, Biden and Victoria Nuland and stuff, they all said beforehand, we're gonna blow up the Nord Stream line. And it just passes away.
It just passes away. That's it. Nothing lands, right?
It's in Europe, people are, was suffering severely as a result of that act of criminal sabotage. And none of our governments, none of our, the thousands of, media platforms in Europe, it's like, America can do whatever they want. The US can do whatever they want. And we're not even going to ask them. We're not even going to question them about it. It's, we've really got into, we've got into a kind of a strange world. I haven't bought a newspaper in years, and I haven't watched a news program on the TV in years.
It's probably wise.
And I kind of get my news from kind of online platforms and stuff, and I kind of sift through them all and so on. And it's always, something interesting's happened to Twitter. I don't know if you go on that. Well, I know you've got an account on it, of course.
I'm on there every morning, Simon. I get my morning coffee and over I go. It's kind of a bad addiction.
I follow you, and I don't see any of your stuff. I follow about 1,000 people. I see 1,000 accounts, and I don't see anything.
I know. I keep sending tweets to Elon saying, please stop shadow banning me, dude. Listen, my follower count didn't move for about 2 years. I was heavily into COVID criticism as kind of a dissident, right? Then I bought the blue check mark, and they released the hounds and they let me grow a bit. And now, because I post quite a bit on trans ideology, I'm completely throttled. Nobody sees my tweets. And I'll just say what bugs me about that is not an ego thing. It's like, this is part of my business, right? And I use it to enhance my listeners and my followers of my Substack. And we do, Elon, if you're listening, which I know you're not, but we do have a kind of a contract that everything is being done above board. Once you start sneaking around in the dark and shadow banning people without actually admitting it, then you're acting like a criminal. This is not like, I'm behaving on Twitter in good faith, right? And they're not. I mean, it's very, very upsetting. Sorry.
It seems to be a kind of a model of democracy, isn't it? If you say something that people are interested in, people will follow you. That will give you a greater kind of purchase on, influence things. So, they're interested in you. I mean, maybe in democracy, maybe a capitalist model as well. If they want what you've got, you get more stuff. That's not where it works anymore. I don't think I'm even being shadow banned. At the moment, 1 week I get Zelensky, and that's all I get. Next week I get environment at the end of the world. Oh, we've had the highest, average temperatures across the world, something out. And then suddenly it stops and it will go on to trans things. We had Pride month. It went on for more than a month, actually, because at the end of the month, then was trans Pride or whatever like that. Yeah. And that's all you see. That's all I see. I follow 1,000 people. I didn't see you. I didn't see you at all. And people say the same with me. So we think we're participating in some sort of forum for debate, which is determined by our interests. And there's flaws with that because Coca-Cola has got a bigger, kind of purchase on the forum so they can kind of sell more of their tins. But at least there's a kind of a basic principle there that if people are interested in you, they will hear more from you. And that means if you say things that people want to hear, and there's a problem in that anyway, but that doesn't happen anymore. It's now a one-way street, and we're being told what we're going to see.
Yeah.
And I think that is very, very interesting as a model of this how a post-democratic form of governance is going to work. Things like the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty says very, very openly that it will have the power, or rather governments will have the obligation to censor any information which contradicts what the WHO says about all sorts of things, about whether a pandemic exists, about what measures are going to be used or imposed, and what the justification for doing it. It is only going to be a one-way street. The WHO speaks and we listen. And I think Twitter is it's not even a model, it's a demonstration of how that's going to work. When they want you to hear you about the latest great counteroffensive by the Ukrainian heroes and led by their hero Zelensky, that is all we see for a week.
Yeah, that's true.
When it's trying to terrify us with global boiling, that's all we're going to see.
Yeah.
And so I think Twitter is very instructive in that way. It's horrible, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to stay on it. But like you, I kind of use it as a part of my business plan, if you like.
Well, and I also use it as a search tool if I want to find stuff on the Maui fire or something like that. It works pretty well because I know I'm going to get a wider bunch of voices than I would in the news department from a news show. But I will, just to stay with Twitter for a minute, because it's really important that he came in as this great savior of free speech. And my friend CJ Hopkins said, Trish, don't fall for it. This is, I don't know if you're reading CJ, but he never believed Elon, right? And he said, don't fall for it, that it's not real. And I was like, oh, CJ, you're such a cynic, right. And at the end of the day, he wins because now that Elon has hired this what's her name? Linda Yaccarino, this chick who is clear. She gave this really McKinsey-esque line about how, oh, well, there's such a thing as lawful speech and awful speech. How many places did you kind of, test that line before you used it? And it sounds cute, but it's meaningless. They're still going to limit. And then there was a thing about limiting reach and all this garbage, right? It's still censorship by any other name is going to be that. And she's doing it. I think I know why, because he wants to make money. And the advertisers have said, you got too much free speech on there. We don't like it. So he brought Linda Yaccarino in to try to pretend it's still free speech while she's throttling everybody and getting the advertisers back. That's just my guess. I don't know how you feel about that.
The video or footage came out. It's actually from a few years ago, I think, but it was Larry Fink. I was at a composite word there. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, talking about imposing these environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria on companies. And since BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street Global Advisor have got something like 20% in shares of the 500 biggest companies in the world in the New York Stock Exchange, which gives them effectively almost like kind of state or government control over these things. And he said very, very openly, people are either going to, comply with this, or you're going to feel the consequences. And he said that, the consequences are, BlackRock turns its back on you, you control funding. So I think that's kind of what's going on now. Elon Musk is a very, very rich and powerful man.
Is BlackRock into Twitter? Do you think they've got money in there? Do you think?
Sure they would.
Yeah.
But what you said, I think, is absolutely right. If BlackRock is putting pressure on companies to say, I'm not going to advertise with Twitter unless it signs up to these criteria, what are they going to do? Say, no, I believe in free speech and Elon Musk? Of course they're not going to do that. Because if they do that, their revenues, their beneficial treatment, this is how all this stuff is working. This is kind of how it's stuffing. And what's going on Twitter, I think, it's not virtual, is it? But it's a sort of a digital exploration of how well, in simple terms, how stakeholder capitalism is going to work in the real world.
Yeah.
And
it's very, very painful. It's very, very painful because I did have high hopes for him. And what you described about, I remember seeing that video, and he used the word obedient, didn't he?
Yeah.
He used the word obedient, and I thought, wow. And it sounds like racketeering to me. Like I own all this stuff, and now I'm going to, it can't be legal for some unelected guy to buy all these shares in all these companies and then try to rule the roost over the world. I just don't see how that's even legal. And I'm sort of a free marketer, although I'll tell you, I'm becoming less so in my old age watching this stuff go down, right? I didn't vote for Larry Fink. I don't want him in my business.
Well, someone who's kind of on our side and all this sort of stuff, who worked in those financial markets, he was telling me, I was kind of writing about BlackRock, and he said, "You got it wrong, Simon. It's not. They haven't. This is all done by algorithms. They wrote the right algorithms, and that is what has made them so powerful. So it's not about decisions that Fink or BlackRock are making. They've just got the algorithms to do it." And this is kind of going back to what I was saying before. When we have a central bank digital currency which is programmed with requirements which will ultimately be set by people like BlackRock or organizations like BlackRock and people like Larry Fink or the head of Morgan Stanley or the head of Goldman Sachs and so on, once that's programmed into the money, into the currency, and as Augustin Carsten sort of says, it's an expression of central bank or central bank liability. If they don't like how you're expressing their liability for that currency, you don't need a legislator to come in and say, "We don't agree with this." It will simply be written into this new digital infrastructure, the same way as it will with digital ID, the way it will be with Agenda 2030 and all these things, all 15-minute cities. I think what we've got to really get our heads around now is we're going into a post, it's not just a post-democratic or a post-political thing, we're going into a post-human world. You don't need a legislator, you don't need a media, you don't need a judiciary even. You don't even need a government when you've got central bank digital currency. The world will be run by the programs within that currency. And once it's written in, I don't know how you're going to write it out in a way. That's the really dark end of the spectrum that we're kind of looking at into the future.
The civilians must rise up and take us back to the Stone Age. I'd be much happier there.
Foucault said that knowledge is power. It's a kind of an old cliche which has been written on every T-shirt of every undergraduate since, but it's never been truer than at this moment in time. And at the moment, they've got all the knowledge and they've got all the power, and we need to really start rising up and get this knowledge out there so people can start resisting this thing.
Yeah, well, let's make a plan. Maybe we should have like a big Zoom call that we'll record with all kinds of smart people thinking about these things, because there has to be a way to motivate and give people tools to fight back. We all do these podcasts that are so doom and gloomy. People say, "Well, okay, what do you want me to do about it?" I'm like, well,
Yeah, it's been the stage all along. I've come up with sort of various little ideas which I kind of publish in my books.
Yeah.
I made Dunning-Paul laugh when I said, my latest, I don't know if you heard this, my latest idea is get rid of your smartphone. And he kind of looked at me with horror with that. But that for me is it's a sine qua non. If you don't get rid of your smartphone, you're not even in the beginning of resistance.
I'm with you. I am with you. Yeah.
Even these practical measures. That's my, don't tell people we have to overthrow, BlackRock. Tell them get rid of your smartphone. That's the first thing you can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, we're going to the cottage soon, my family, and I'll try and get my grown boys, now men, to put their cell phones in a box somewhere so that we can actually, and resist the urge to Google. Try and think it through yourself. Find your own information. Anyway, thank you so much. You're a treasure. And I'm really grateful that there's people like you out there thinking this through, because we need it. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you again. I hope you'll have me back another time when I've done the next thing.
Absolutely.
Keep on going on, and hope your listeners enjoy this.
Okay, thanks. Bye, Simon. Have a good weekend. Bye. That was Simon Elmer from Architects for Social Responsibility out of the UK, and he writes a lot on the rise of the global biosecurity state. Very smart cat. Okay. I did end the show last week with Oliver Anthony's anthemic song, Richmond, north of Richmond, which is just skyrocketing around the world. It's really interesting and it really hit a nerve. So I'm going to play it today to end the show. And I'm also going to play it next week. I just like it and it's my show and I can do that. But there's something special about the version that I'm going to play for you today. It is contained in a video edited by my friend Matt Orfalea, who is a very, very talented editor and journalist working in Washington, D.C. And he's taken this song and the video for the song, and he's cut in reactions of people listening to the song for the first time. Now, apparently there are whole like YouTube or TikTok channels or something devoted to people filming themselves reacting to something for the first time. I didn't even know that. I don't live in that world, but Matt's young, so he understands these things. Anyway, he cut some of these reactions into the actual video. So you see people reacting as they're hearing what Oliver Anthony is saying. And let me say this. Obviously, you can't see this because it's audio only, our show for now. You can find it in the Substack I did for last week's show with Helen Joyce. I posted it there, but I wanted to play it again for you. A, I love the song. And B, I wanted to talk a little bit about what this edit by Matt Orfalea is telling us. And it's telling us this really important thing, maybe the most important thing that I will say to you this year. And that is that we are not going to let them pit us against each other. We're not doing that anymore. And what happens in this song, and I was very emotional about it, and Matt told me he was emotional about it too. There are a lot of young black men in this video listening to a white, what they would have called a cracker or a hillbilly or whatever derogatory term, a redneck, and crying because the song captures what's happened to the middle and lower middle class and the working poor in America and in Canada too. And what happened was, and never forget this, the McKinsey Management Consulting Company, who I am constantly taking the piss out of on this show and other shows I do, convinced manufacturing companies, car manufacturers and others, to move their plants offshore. Those plants in the olden days gave working people with a trade an excellent income. You could work at the Ford Motor plant and buy a house and send your kid to school and have 2 cars and take a vacation. You could do that then. Think about that, right? They were paying $40 an hour to some of these union guys, 30 years ago. That was a lot of money. And they should have paid them a lot of money, and they were treated respectfully and well. And that is all gone because those factories were sent offshore, and none of the political parties really stood up to stop it. Not even the left. Not really. They didn't. And what happened during the Clinton campaign in 2016, these people who are now dying of diseases of despair, like drug overdoses and fentanyl and everything else, violence, were told to learn to code. This is a new day. You got to learn to code. And that's just not, we can't live that way. We can't let the big corporations dictate what our society is going to be like. And somebody should have said, hey, people, if you're going to start manufacturing your stuff offshore, we're not buying it. And we're not giving you tax breaks either. That's what should have happened. And these mistakes keep being made over and over again. And who do they benefit? They benefit the rich men north of Richmond, meaning the politicians and the business types who profit from these completely inhumane decisions that they make. That is what this song is about. And that pain that he is writing about and singing about from his gut is affecting people all over America and Canada and other places. It's a dangerous song. Pray for Oliver Anthony. Pray for him, because this is one of the most dangerous things that's happened against the global elites and what they've done to us all in a very, very long time. It's astonishing. It's a great song. This is a great video. If you haven't seen it, go to my Substack. You will hear a little bit of the voices, a little bit of the talking and people reacting as you're listening to this. But any excuse to play Richmond, north of Richmond is fine with me. So here we go. I'm going to say, stay critical. When you hear this, I'll be sitting on the beach, praise be to God, with my rescue dog. And I'll have this on my portable little beach radio too. This is going to be on a loop at the cottage. My family will be driven absolutely mad by it, but I don't care because I like it. So stay critical. See ya.
Well, I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul.
I can rock with that.
These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. 'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end.
Okay.
The rich men, the rich men.
Oh, this is true. Tell 'em, buddy.
Some of us can't say what we absolutely know is true, and he's articulating it.
I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese milking welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me.
What?
People like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. 'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end. 'Cause the rich men north of Richmond. I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay.
Damn.
To you.
Oh my God! Oliver, Anthony.
Richmond, north of Richmond.